Welcome, everyone. This is the last of our bird ID sessions for MarshWatch. I can't believe we've gotten this far so quickly. Let's try to advance the slide, shall we? There we go. I'd just like you to know that I'm actually broadcasting from somewhere other than Saskatoon today. I'm in Banff National Park, which is included in the territories of the Treaty 6, 7, and 8 First Nations, as well as the homeland of the Métis people. And Banffshire is a lovely spot. My name is Leanne Latremoy, and I don't know that we have too many new people joining, but this entire time we have, so I'll go through my quick little spiel. My name is Leanne Latremoy. I love wetlands, and I have the pleasure of working for a not-for-profit called Birds Canada. We're a national charity, and we try to help people appreciate, understand, and conserve the wild birds in Canada. And one of my favorite places to be in the world is next to, or even in, as you can see in some cases, a wetland. And hopefully I can share that passion with you through these series. Okay, on the agenda for tonight, we're going to go through some bird and amphibian ID. That's all going to be recorded and posted online. And then we'll shut the recording down and we'll get to the quizzes and discussion and fun parts. Got a full slate for you today. We've got two more rails. We've got Virginia and yellow rail. We've got two sparrows that look an awful lot alike, and chances are you're probably going to hear them before you'll ever see them. We got LeConte and Nelson sparrows. And we also have two other lookalikes. We've got the Western and Clark's grebes, as well as Bobolink, white-faced Ibis, and a couple of really cute fossorial toads that spend a lot of time underneath, the soil and the dirt and things. So we got plain spadefoot and the Great Plains toad. Okay, let's get started with the Virginia rail. If you thought soras were hard to get a look at, Virginia rails are even harder. They're not a very bold species. They definitely don't like to come out in the open. And unless you're very lucky and very patient sitting next to a wetland, chances are good that you're probably not going to see this bird anytime soon. It's totally possible, but don't go out there thinking I'm going to see a yellow rail or a Virginia rail this year, because it's not likely to happen. They're a medium-sized rail, a little bit bigger than the Sora, and they're quite structurally different. They have this long drooping red bill. And the thing that really stands out, other than that kind of long droopy bill, is this cool blue-toned gray face on an otherwise kind of warm, rusty body. There's barring on some of the back end of the flanks, there's barring on the back, but that face really contrasts with the rest of the body. That kind of, there's a black cap going on and those rusty flanks. But really, if you do see a Virginia rail rooting around and creeping around, that red bill is going to stand out, as well as that pale face on the rest of kind of a darker body. That's what you're going to be looking out for. Both sexes look the same. And they're, like I said, they're pretty secretive little birds. You'll find them in wetlands with emergent vegetation. And for the most part, we think that soras are way more dominant than Virginia rails, and you don't often see them in, some of the same places, or not in as high density. We did a bunch of trapping of rails for a while, and it was really much harder to trap Virginia rails. They're much more secretive. They don't want to come out into the open, so they do like to be kind of sneaky and hidden. Their calls are not terribly loud, and they can really blend into the background. So the first call is called the ticket call, and it really goes like ticket, 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 ticket. And they can do that for, a long stretch of time, but for whatever reason, it doesn't always grab your attention, and suddenly you realize you've been listening to this Virginia rail for 5 minutes and you're only cluing into it. So I'll play the ticket call here. Oh my, that's very loud. Sorry, I had to turn that down. Forgot I had my own volume on absolute max, and I've got different headphones, so that was very loud in my ear. Hopefully it wasn't too obnoxious for you at home. Okay, so that was the ticket, 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 ticket call, and that was a recording that was fairly close to it. So you can imagine, there's any kind of distance in between you and the Virginia rail, and you hear that kind of ticket, 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 ticket. It kind of sounds like maybe a cricket going until you really catch on. It's like, okay, this is like long and consistent, and it's coming from a wetland, not where crickets live. Okay, let's play that ticket once again. And in the back of that, you can hear all the spring peepers going. Okay, The other call that they do is a grunt, and they'll often do this as a pair, so you can hear two of them grunting at the same time on occasion, and it kind of sounds like a little pig in the marsh. So if you imagine like a little pig going quack 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 quack, it really sounds like that, and that's their grunt call. So kind of grunty, squeaky. I've heard it described as, spinning a quarter on a table, and it kind of, as it's getting, slower and slower, it makes a slower sound. I really think it sounds much more like a grunting pig. You'll find them in a lot of the same places that you find sora habitat-wise, wetlands with emergent vegetation and some water for them to forage in and around. So wetlands that you'll be seeing cattails or bulrushes in. They're very handsome little guys. And again, as you can see in that kind of top photo, it's that paler face just pops on the rest of the bird's body, as does that drooping kind of red bill. And as you might imagine, with a bill that's kind of long and droopy, as we've seen with a few species, those guys tend to do kind of probing and pecking. So they're going to go after all kinds of little invertebrates, even some small amphibians, and occasionally seeds as well. So they're just going to be eating all the protein that they can find with their little bills. And again, they're pretty sneaky, and they're quite laterally compressed. Like, I know they look really wide looking at the side of the bird, but if you were to see them head on, they're quite narrow, they're quite slender that way. And that really is to help, them weave in and out of all of that densely packed, very vertical vegetation. There's not a lot of horizontal stuff that they need to get through. It's often, all of those wetland plants, they tend to just be very tall and vertical. So they weave their way through all of those and, try not to make things move too much. Virginia rails have a wide distribution. I keep stumbling over that one today. So you're potentially likely to encounter them, across a fair bit of Canada and the US. These guys are really, really active dawn and kind of pre-dawn. As you get through into the morning, their calling rates drop off kind of markedly. So, you really don't see or hear them past a few hours, but maybe an hour or two after sunrise. The bonus, though, is that they can start to call again in the evening, and they'll be calling at night. And if you've never visited a wetland at night, I highly recommend it. If you have one nearby that you can access at night, I suggest you go out and go for a listen, because you'll really hear them come to life with all of the wetland birds. Okay, the other rail that we've got here in the northern Great Plains is the yellow rail. And this one, if you thought the other rails were sneaky, this one just blows them all out of the water. This is a bird that is very seldom seen. It's one of those species that are on the lists of a lot of people to try to get a look at, because it's one of those that they really are very secretive. They don't fly very much, and they're really, the same color as the vegetation, and they're extremely sneaky. They're quite a small little rail. They're quite compact as well, and they have a short little yellow bill. They're streaked brown overall, so kind of those buffy, beigey tones with darker brown and kind of little barring on the back with little strips of white that you can see. And they do show a white wing patch in flight. So if you ever do happen to see them in flight, they're different than what, a sora or a Virginia rail would look like that have all dark wings. The yellow rail has a white patch on that same kind of speculum area that most of the ducks have a colorful patch. The yellow rails are actually going to have a little white patch. And I was just kind of blown away that somebody actually got a photo of yellow rails in flight, because it's just so impossible to get to see them. And part of why I have a bunch of yellow rail photos is that we in Birds Canada in the Saskatoon office, we worked for a few years trapping yellow rails. So this is a bird that you're going to see in kind of shallow, sedgy, grassy wetlands. So think wetland that kind of has overflown some of its basins for a year or two, and it's got lots of really lush grasses and sedges. As those wetlands recede, you can find them kind of into areas that are interspersed with cattails, and they're not selecting for that. They're kind of selecting for the right amount of kind of moisture, in the kind of grassy wetland vegetation. So they're kind of like a Goldilocks species. They really like that kind of just those damp edges of wetlands, especially, all those grasses and sedges, because their diet consists of a lot of very small snails. And if you've ever been to some of these little sedge wetlands, you'll see sometimes they're just absolutely covered in little tiny snails. So small snails make a big, big portion of their diet, as well as other aquatic insects, terrestrial insects, and the odd seed as well. So this is a species that makes a sound that really doesn't sound like a bird. Honestly, it sounds like if you could take two small stones and tap them together, going tick, 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 tick. It's a 2-3. So 2 ticks close together, a tiny gap, and then 3 ticks close together. It really does sound like you're tapping stones. Let's play the yellow rail tick, tick call. Really, really doesn't sound like a bird. Honestly, it sounds like tapping two stones together, or rolls of quarters. It kind of has that like thud to it. And this call can actually travel a decent distance away. They call predominantly at night. I know in some of the higher Arctic areas where you get yellow rails as well, where they don't really get a nighttime, you can get them calling all times of day. But further south, where most of us are potentially, going to encounter them, these guys really do call at night. And they don't fly terribly well. They much prefer to be walking and clambering through all the vegetation. And even if it's a night with a full moon, you're gonna have less yellow rails calling, because they don't like to be seen. So they're quite sneaky, quite secretive. And I've managed to get a few of these photos, like I said, in part because we did a study trapping yellow rails and doing, mark recapture. And I'll just show you this one little video of a yellow rail as it was released after banding. So we put a little band on its leg, take some measurements, and then, send them on their way. A lot of birds, they're going to be flying after rails. They don't do that so much. So you put them on the ground, you let their eyes kind of adjust, and then they'll wander off. And yellow rails they can be so aggressive in the breeding season. They're actually tough to band because they have incredibly sharp little claws, and they're also very feisty. We've had them do that tick 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 call while they're being held in your hand, which is not at all the case for almost any species. Of course, like they'll scream and they'll make noise, but they won't necessarily just do their call. Anyway, so we would catch these guys by going out into wetlands at, dead of night sort of thing, with a great big headlamp on, and we would play their call and catch them with fish landing nets. We would stamp down an area, the birds would crawl, wiggle their way out to us. You could see just the tops of the vegetation moving, and then suddenly they'd be, in catching range, and then we just set our nets down over top of them and try to grab them quick, because even the tiniest gap, they're really, really good at pushing through it. So here is a yellow rail being released. He's got a nice shiny jewelry on, just kind of shaking it off. But a really kind of brown, streaky little rail, nice little yellow bill. And then they just kind of walk away. So it was a real privilege getting to work with them for 4 seasons. And a lot of species that really like that kind of shallow wetland habitat, it's an ephemeral habitat type. Like it could be, there one year and not the other, or even within a season, say, you have a drought and it doesn't get any sort of seasonal or any sort of like rain replenishment, they can dry out. And as a result, these aren't species that are really, tied to a location. There's some warbler species where they've tracked them coming back to the same tree year after year after year. Yellow rails and Similarly, Nelson sparrows and LeConte sparrows, they like these ephemeral habitats. They have almost no site fidelity. They're just going to be going around and trying to find suitable looking habitat. And once they find it, they're going to stay there. It doesn't matter where it is. If it's, 100 kilometers away from where they were last year, they're cluing in on just habitat type, and they're not necessarily going back to the same area. All that to say is that we captured 52 yellow rails over the years, and we only ever had one recapture from a previous year, which was, we're actually surprised that we caught one from the previous year because it was, they are so ephemeral and they do move around so much. Yellow rails have a fairly large distribution. A lot of it is centered in Canada. They do get up into the boreal forest. And I think some of the boreal forest stuff, like if the prairies are dry, like a lot of species, they'll wind up in the boreal forest more because they're going through the prairies and not finding anything. But then again, in the Hudson Bay lowlands, it seems like year after year, that's one of those places that winds up holding yellow rails. So interesting little species that is near and dear to my heart. Okay. Next up, we've got two very, very similar sparrow species, LeConte sparrow and Nelson sparrow. They are so similar, in fact, that we're going to first focus on the calls and the songs because they're another, species that you don't often see. And if you see them, they tend to be a little bit far away, and they're both actually really similar looking. There's a couple of little tells, but for the most part, I don't know that I've identified any of them that I've ever encountered by sight. It's always hearing the call and then eventually seeing, the bird make itself available. But I go with almost 100% of the time, you're going to be identifying these two species by song, and they can seem a little bit similar, but I'm going to help walk you through it. So the LeConte sparrow, it really sounds like an insect. It has a two-parted, this is the spectrogram here. It goes ticka-ch, ticka-ch, kind of harsh, kind of insect-like. So let's listen to the ticka-ch. So kind of imagine how you might think a grasshopper sounds like. The Nelson sparrow, on the other hand, is quite quiet, and the sound is really, it just sounds ephemeral. It dies off really quickly. The sound attenuates quickly. So if you get any distance between you and the Nelson sparrow, you're going to have a hard time hearing it. And to me, it sounds a bit more like a bacon sizzle. It's a little bit lower pitched, but it has a more airy, ethereal quality to it. And to me, it kind of sounds like it's going tequila. And that part really doesn't travel far, and it decays. And I'm talking like, 50 meters away, 75 meters away, you might not be hearing it so well. And 100 meters, it's going to be really tough to pick up the call. Whereas the LeConte sparrow, you can hear them over a greater distance than that. Still not anything like the American bittern, but you'll hear them more loudly. So let's listen to that bacon sizzly tequila ethereal call or song of the Nelson sparrow. So really, really thin sounding. I'm gonna go one more time, I think. There we go. So really ephemeral, really kind of airy, and like I said, the sound just kind of attenuates. Whereas the LeConte sparrow, it has a more definite start and an end. It goes ticka, but that kind of just, stops really, really sharply. And you can even see that a little bit in the spectrogram here. Play the ticka again. And then the Nelson sparrow. Okay, let's take a quick peek at what these two sparrows look like. So LeConte's, and Nelsons. Both of them are kind of, they give the impression of being kind of orangey overall when you see them at a distance. Warm, straw, buffy, orangey tones to them, just kind of as a general rule. On the LeConte sparrow, if you're telling these two apart, the median crown stripe, so the crown stripe that goes right in the middle, like imagine, they've got their hair parted like I do. So on the LeConte sparrow, that crown, that median crown stripe is, straw colored. It's pale. It's not quite white, but it's, kind of straw colored. On the Nelson sparrow, it's this nice dark gray, which really blends into the rest of the crown. So they've got the median crown stripe, and then they got two other crown stripes on the side. There's a lot of contrast for the LeContes, and then there's almost no contrast on the Nelson sparrow. So again, that kind of gray median stripe. The other easy clue, which is still not super obvious, is the nape, so the back of the neck. On the LeContes, it's kind of this grayish color with kind of almost purpley stripes down the back of the neck, whereas on the Nelsons, it's just kind of plain gray. So very, very similar looking species. And again, they're not like something like a song sparrow that's going to get up on a branch and sing, sing, sing away. These guys are going to be singing oftentimes from a wetland and, going to be sedgy, grassy stuff that they're, for the most part, going to be singing from within. And it's only a small fraction of the, both of these species that I've ever encountered that I've actually seen the bird. And like I said, I don't think I've ever identified them solely on looks unless it's someone's photograph. So they both do have some dark facial markings, kind of a little black line, little black patch that goes behind the eye. The auricular, these are the feathers that cover the ear holes. They're both kind of grayish on both species, and they're kind of, sparrow stripes, so that streaky black brown kind of coloration with an overall straw and orangey tones, especially at a distance. The Nelsons looks more orange, but I would absolutely not use that as a definitive marker. You're really going to want to hear these two. And luckily enough, the Nelsons really does call a fair bit. Here we can see them again. You can still just kind of barely make out the nape colors on both of these, but the median crown stripe gives it away. So LeConte's is going to be a bit drier land than the Nelsons. They still like moist soil. And so we tend to call these, and I say we, just us locally at Birds Canada here, we tend to call them moist soil sparrows because they really do like to be in areas where the grass is lush and growing well, which usually means, at least out here, that there is some moist soil going on. Maybe it's not, it's one of those class 1 wetlands that's wet in the spring and then dries up as the season goes on. So you'll find LeContes in open habitats, marshy meadows, tend to favor a little bit drier places. Nelson sparrow, oftentimes in the same places that you'd be finding a yellow rail, so shallow, grassy, and sedgy wetlands. They tend to like it a little bit wetter, so you'll more often see Nelsons closer to a big wetland, just somewhere on the margin if there happens to be like a sedgy margin of the wetland. They both eat seeds and insects as well as arthropods. And again, during the breeding season, especially when they're feeding kids, they're going after, the insects and the arthropods and stuff, but they'll eat seeds and other things, on the wintering grounds for sure. Okay, let's listen to those two calls again. LeConte's tick-a-ch. And the more bacon sizzly tequila of the Nelsons. And I'm going to play you some audio from that track because I did have a nice recording of, a LeConte and a Nelson sparrow with not much else going on, and both of them fairly close. We'll give a little bit of a listen and try to pick out the LeConte and the Nelson sparrow in it. So hopefully you're able to pick up on a little bit of those subtleties, more of a kind of grasshoppery LeConte sparrow versus the Nelson's more sizzly tequila like. And maybe you're starting to pick up some birds in the background too. There was Wilson snipe going and Sora going in the background of that track. LeConte's sparrow has a fairly central distribution, so the prairie provinces in Canada are really important when it comes to the range of the species, as is a fair chunk of Ontario and parts of Quebec and some of the western states in the north. And the Nelson sparrow has a bit more of a restricted distribution, but it's also a bit more disjunct. So you'll have the kind of, the prairie provinces blob of occurrence, and then you also have kind of the Hudson's Bay and the James Bay lowlands, and then you'll get the seaside of the Maritimes provinces and parts of Quebec as well. So a little bit more disjunct, but here in the prairies we have them overlapping quite a fair bit. Okay, next up, the other two look-alike species. By far the more common of the two species, the Western and Clark's, we're going to be seeing the Western grebe. Far, far, far more common, and they're the one that you're typically going to see. So these are large grebes, and they're really kind of boldly patterned black and white. Again, that white really stands out at a distance, and so does that dark. So they offer a nice amount of contrast, and they have these really, really elegant long necks and quite long bills on them. They kind of have like a loon-sized bill on their face, so quite a long bill. Both sexes look the same, black and white overall. They do have a white belly, and you do get to see that when they're doing their courtship displays. The bill is a dull yellowish, kind of bordered on the top and bottom with black. So it's not very bright yellow, and we'll see why that's important in a sec. And the black on the crown extends below the eye. And again, this is all for birds in the breeding season. So the black, you're going to have it kind of encompassing the eye. It kind of peters out a little bit, gets a little bit grayish, but by and large, especially if you're looking at it at a distance, the black of the cap on the head is going to be encompassing the eye. You'll see grebes like this on rather large wetlands or lakes, and they nest in large stands of emergent vegetation, oftentimes in a colony. So you'll usually get multiple Western grebes nesting together. And their call is quite loud, and it really sounds like a rusty gate hinge going kind of a creak, creak. So really quite loud, really sounds like that rusty gate hinge. These guys are expert divers, as grebes all are. They go after fish primarily, but they'll occasionally grab other prey as it makes itself available. And as I mentioned when we talked about some of the other grebes, they all pluck feathers from their belly and feed them to their kids. They'll also eat them themselves. And this is thought to help keep fish bones in the stomach longer, to help them, get broken down more by the stomach acids. That's a hypothesis. We can't actually, we don't know for certain, but that's the likely reason, is that it creates kind of a bolus that plugs the passage of, solids through the rest of the digestive tract. So it keeps those fish bones that are kind of harder to digest and dissolve in the stomach in the acid portion a little bit longer. And they do really, really beautiful, elaborate courtship displays. If you ever find yourself like noticing, hey, there's a lot of Western grebes on this lake, you might want to go check them out in the early season, and kind of like May and early June, to see them doing these courtship displays. And below here, there's a really nice example here of them doing the weed ceremony, where they're presenting each other with lots of vegetation, because that's how they build their nests. So they're saying to their partner, hey, look at all the vegetation I'm capable of gathering. Isn't this great? We'll build a beautiful nest together. Western grebes are fairly Western, as the name indicates. So if you're, in the eastern part of Canada or the US, you're going to have to come further west to enjoy the Western grebes. Clark's grebe, on the other hand, very, very handsome, but this is not a species that you're likely to see very often. I've seen one for sure, and I don't know that I've seen any more after that. And it was close. I got a really good look at it. So large grebe, essentially the same shape, structure, overall look to the Western grebe, but there's two major differences that will help you spot them or tell the two apart. So if you have the right lighting, the bill on the Clark's grebe is just very, very brightly yellow. It has a little bit of dark on the top, but overall really bright yellow that is bold and vivid and stands out. Compared to the Western grebe, if you see them side by side, the Western grebe's bill looks really drab, not very exciting. The other thing is that, remember when I was kind of emphasizing that the black covered, the feathers around the eye for the Western grebe? Well, in Clark's, you can see the eye. I hope I made that the right direction. Oh, here we go. So in Clark's, you can see the eye. That's kind of how I've worked it into my brain and into my head, and it just kind of works and sticks this way. If they ever decide to rename the Clark's grebe, I hope it's something with an S or a C so that we can keep the memory aid consistent. Otherwise, they are quite similar between the two species, but that feathering around the eye, so if you can actually see it, if there's white around the eye or black around the eye, and again, that bill color, quite bright, quite vivid on the Clark's grebe, and really just kind of dull olivey yellow on the Western grebe. They do have a different call. It's not two-parted, it's one-parted, so they just do a long creak. And you'll often see them nesting along with Western grebes, so in those kind of larger lakes and ponds and wetlands in a colony in stands of emergent vegetation. So taking a look at those two side by side, in the Western, the eye is surrounded by dark feathering. In the Clark's, you can see the eye a little bit better. It's not surrounded by dark feathering. And that bill, again, just looking at those two side by side, you can really see the quite vivid yellow of the Clark's and the more dull yellowish of the Western grebe. And the calls are a little bit different. Creak, creak, more two-parted rusty gate hinge for the Western. Versus the more just, oh no. Am I there for everyone here? My other computer just died. Oh, okay, good. So it's just the other computer that decided to, okay, we're good. Good. I just panicked a little bit when I saw the other one. Okay, thank you. Okay. In Clark's, you can see the eye and it has a more, single syllable creak call. Okie doke. Clark's grebe, mostly sympatric, having the same range as the Western grebe, still rather Western in its distribution. Okay. We also have the bobolink. So taking a swing away from things that are more closely related to the water, the bobolink is a blackbird, so it is related to yellow-headed blackbirds and red-winged blackbird. They have, as blackbirds do, they have conical bills. This one looks a little bit more like a sparrow bill out of all of the blackbirds, but it's still kind of cone-shaped and pointy, and it is black in the males. The thing that really stands out about the bobolink is that kind of straw patch on the back of the head. It's like the buffle head of, the songbirds. It has that really just quite outstanding patch of the straw color. It actually contrasts with the larger white patches. You can really make out that it's a pale yellow straw color. So a very black bird with great big straw patch on the back of the head, white wing patches, and a white back. So they're really flashy in flight. And when they're displaying, they tend to make themselves really visible. So they'll sing, they'll do flight calls, and they'll also, perch up on some vegetation and they'll fan out their wings and puff up their back feathers, and they are quite eye-catching. So handsome little bird. This is another one where you're going to see them in kind of moist, grassy fields. You'll also find them in irrigated hay fields as well as natural grassy wetlands. So kind of that some of that same habitat that you're likely to see Nelson's and LeConte sparrows in, you're also likely to get bobolinks in as well. And they make one of the coolest songs out of all of the birds. It really does sound like robot noises or like R2-D2. And I won't even try to imitate it because I can't do it justice. It is sure to bring joy. And absolutely sounds like some sort of a robot or like R2-D2. And they'll fly and they'll sing this quite a bit. And if you get a few males going, they'll be singing back and forth. So it just sounds like a crazy little robot party happening somewhere in a grassy meadow. It's a song that I haven't seen, anyone not smile when they hear it. Whenever they sing, it just kind of makes people smile, and I love that about them. It's just kind of totally out there, doesn't sound like it should be coming from a bird at all. Let's hear that one more time. So really, really does sound like a robot, and it doesn't sound like something a bird should be able to make in terms of noises. The females, on the other hand, look different. The females are very plain, incredibly plain, and they are not showy. The males, do all of that displaying, all of that showing off, and the females would rather just not be seen at all. So overall, they really, really have a very straw-colored appearance. There's the straw color going all the way down the belly, all over the bird. You can still see that conical pointy bill, but it is kind of pinkish in females. And for whatever reason, they tend to look very leggy. They've got long legs. And if you've ever seen them perch or held one in the hand at a banding station or seen one being held, they have incredibly long toenails. So you can see these here just really, really long. I'm not sure why they have long toenails compared to other species that, live in similar habitats, but they do. Anyway, so very, very straw colored buffy overall. They've got one kind of dark eye line that goes between the eye and the back of the head. Otherwise, they are really, really just straw colored and stripy colored. So the best giveaway is going to be displaying males first. You're very, very likely to hear or see the males long before you see the female. Of course, you do have the odd chance to see a female, especially as they're foraging and gathering food, up on her own. But chances are good the male is going to draw your attention first if he's anywhere in the neighborhood. And then you can think to, try to look out for a similarly sized, similarly shaped bird going around being a little bit more sneaky about their behavior. So female bobolinks, quite sneaky, quite cryptic. They eat a lot of insects off of vegetation, so they'll grab spiders, snails, insect larvae. Also eat seeds, especially in the off season. So you can see a couple of displaying here. So here's the male looking at the front, fanning its tail out, putting its wings out. It's got so many feathers puffed up, even on its chest. It's singing loudly, and it's got that kind of straw-colored cap to it. And you can see it in the bottom here too, puffing up all of its feathers. And that female, again, she's really, really plain, kind of a lemony straw color overall, and rather stripy. She more closely resembles a sparrow than, say, some of the other species. Think like red-winged blackbird. Both the females of bobolink and red-winged blackbird really are tricky for people to tell them apart from sparrows, but they have a longer conical bill, and again, you'll likely see the males as well when you're seeing the females. So don't worry about them too much. Focus on the males, and eventually you'll get to seeing the females. Bobolinks have quite a broad distribution in Canada and the northern US. So this is a species that if you get out to any of those kind of wet habitats, you're likely to run into them. Okay, last but not least for our birds, we have the white-faced ibis. And this is something that's increasingly common, in the northern Great Plains on the Canada side. They're expanding their range. They're becoming more frequent in Saskatchewan. They've been in Alberta for a little bit longer, and they're kind of making their way westward and kind of northward from the Dakotas. So medium large wading bird, and they're super, super distinct. They're large, kind of chocolate brown overall, and they have this exaggerated, long, drooping, kind of grayish blue tinged bill. Both sexes look similar, and they have this little iridescence on their wings, which can be really, really gorgeous if you get them in the right light. Lovely red legs, white feathers around kind of red facial skin here. So that's actually bare skin between the eye and the beak in that area called the lores. Nice little white, giving them the name white-faced ibis. And they do have a nice red eye. There is a slight chance that there is a glossy ibis, and they look quite similar, but they have less white on the face, and they tend to not have as red a patch between the eye and the bill. But for the most part, what we're getting here on, in the Canada side is the white-faced ibis. So you'll find these guys in shallow wetlands, and they nest in emergent vegetation or low trees and shrubs. And for the Saskatchewan Breeding Bird Atlas, we actually had one record of them gathering nesting material. So that's I think as far as we've gotten in terms of nesting so far in the province. No actual nest found, but the behavior that indicates that they're trying to breed. So we do have that. And they make kind of a guttural honking noise. And that's more of a sound that's going to kind of draw your attention, and then you'll notice the quite obvious bird. So don't worry too much about memorizing the call of the white-faced ibis, because this is a species that you are likely to see, and they can occur in quite large flocks. I think the largest one I've seen in Saskatchewan was at least 80 individuals. This is close to the Alberta border, but yeah, it was one of those things where I saw one or two and it's like, oh, that's so exciting. And then I drove a little bit farther and I could see, another part of the slope that I wasn't able to see. And it's just like, boom, oh my goodness, that is a lot of ibis. So I was pretty excited. That was quite early in the spring. I guess I had that one on automatic. First summer birds look a little bit different. So, they haven't gotten their plumage yet. So they'll have a nice kind of stripy head, and overall they're just going to look more dull. They're not going to have those beautiful, red legs showing. So they're going to have they tend to have a darker iris and darker facial skin. But again, it's really going to be hard to mistake that kind of really dark, large wading bird that has a long drooping bill that's, going to be poking around in the mud. These guys, as you might imagine, they're using that long bill to probe and feel around for aquatic and moist soil insects, little crustaceans, and earthworms. A lot of these species have little sensors on the tips of their bill, so they can put the bill into, whatever substrate and, feel if little critters are moving around, and then they can snap them up. They have a really neat looking flight silhouette. They keep their necks extended in flight, and you can see that drooping bill and those legs kind of just trailing behind them. They don't tuck them up. So quite a handsome little bird. The first summer birds are maybe not the classiest looking, but the full breeding adults are quite lovely. So this is currently what the map of the white-faced ibis looks like. And you're going to tell me, well, Leanne, you just told me we have them in Alberta and Saskatchewan, and maybe I think you've got a little bit in Winnipeg as well. That's because range maps aren't always updated immediately. They often go through a process, and species get revisited sometimes. It can be many years, but this is why we do things like breeding bird atlases, where we go around documenting what's nesting in an area, because that changes over time. And here's the example for Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba. And these are all different breeding evidence codes. This is all data combined. So this includes eBird records, where you're not necessarily indicating whether a bird is nesting there or not, but you can see all of those kind of dark reds. Those are confirmed nesting spots. And then there's probable nesting behaviors and possible nesting. And then just all of the black ones, a fair bit of those are either birds on the move outside of the breeding season or eBird records. So you can see them in Canada increasingly so in these last kind of 10 or so years. So get out to some of those wetlands and you might be able to see some of those ibis. And I think it's either right here or right here where I saw the the large group of them. It was, again, pretty exciting for me. Okay, we are on to our amphibians. So we've got two fossorial species, and fossorial, means something that lives under the earth. So plain spadefoot toad really can like dig around and, spend the winter and a lot of the drier portions of the season underground, where the soil is cooler and the soil is moister. So they're relatively small toads. They're not very large, but they do have outsized large eyes for their body size. Their bodies are variable in color. They usually have some little orange spots on them. Some have stripes. They tend to have short legs, and those are really good for digging around. And they just look really chubby. Even the other toads that we looked at, they don't quite look this chubby, but the plain spadefoot definitely does. They tend to be nocturnal and secretive, because as you can imagine, if you're shaped like that, you are maybe not the best at getting away from predators. So they're going to be more active at night, and they're going to spend, the daytime and a lot of their, off season, if you will, burrowed into moist soils and soils that are, they call it friable, and this just means you're able to dig around in it. It's kind of loose. It's not very compact soil, and they make a neat little whirring call. So that kind of whir, 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 whir is boreal chorus frog going on in the background, but it's a neat sound. It's one that I haven't heard yet. I haven't found a plain spadefoot yet. I don't think I'm likely to see one. I'm more likely to hear one. So we'll play that call again. So cute little toad. Another cute little toad, very kind of similar in structure, but doesn't have quite as massive eyes compared to the body size, is the Great Plains toad. This one's a little bit bigger, kind of more along the medium size in terms of toads. Variable, gray, browns, and greens. There tends to be darker blotching on them, and got little red dots as well on them. They both, have short little legs. Again, those are much better at digging if you've got little short legs, and they're fossorial when they're inactive, so they're going to be inactive a fair bit of the time. This is another one that tends to be secretive and more nocturnal as well. You'll find them in kind of deserts, grasslands, semi-arid shrublands, open agricultural areas, and floodplains. And they have kind of a long, loud metallic trill or mechanical trill. And it's almost kind of warbly, almost as if, if you, I don't think there's a name for it, but when you do this as a kid, you can imagine doing that. And that's kind of what the Great Plains toad sounds like. And I have heard this one before, and they can be really, really loud. I was doing surveys, and it was near an oil derrick, and it was going, so you could hear all the machinery and the thing, tipping up like one of those bird toys that drink water as you tip them. Anyway, Really, really loud call, kind of has that warbling, gurgly kind of sound to it, and you can hear it a long ways. Play that once more. And it goes on and on and on. Okay, that is our species for the evening. So let's go back and do a little bit of a review. We added two more rails to our species list, the Virginia rail and the yellow rail. Virginia rail, definitely a larger rail, has that kind of red, long, drooping bill, and that kind of pale grayish face just contrasts with the rest of the body, and it kind of makes the face stand out a fair bit. And they do both a ticket, 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 ticket call, as well as a grunt, which can be done as a duet between two birds. Let's hear the ticket call first. And we'll contrast that kind of immediately with the yellow rail's tick, 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 tick. The tick, tick really does sound like someone's tapping stones together. I promise you that is a bird, and that is indeed what it sounds like. And if you get a bunch of them going together, it can actually just sound like popcorn. But they're just going off all at different times, and it really is quite the soundscape when they're, you know, fully calling and overlapping. The other Virginia rail call that they do is the grunt. Sounds kind of like a little piglet in the marsh. So once more. Okay, so those are our two definitely on the secretive side rails. Next up, we have our similarly, maybe not quite as secretive sparrows, but definitely ones that you are much, much, much more likely to hear than see. And even if you do see them, you might not see them well enough to know what they are. The LeConte sparrow does more of an insect-like harsh tick-a-ch. And the Nelson sparrow, on the other hand, much more kind of thin, ethereal sounding, tequila. And that's one, because it is kind of just so vanishing sounding, it can be really tough if your ear's not kind of trained for it to pick them up. I think I'm not sure if Sandy's online tonight, but I know, you know, if you're not used to hearing them, it can be really tough. And I remember with Sandy trying to point out, you know, when the Nelson sparrow was singing, because we heard it on the one of the Prince Albert, oh no, uh, the Blaine Lake trip. We're at a wetland that had Nelson sparrows going, but they're so quiet, even though they're not super far away. It's just, oh, you just wish they were a little bit louder. So quite quiet, quite ephemeral sounding, versus the LeConte's harsher insect-like tick-a-ch. And we have our two grebes, creek creek for the western grebe and creek for the Clarks. Remember, Clarks, you can see the eye a little bit better because there's no dark black feathering around it, and the bill is much brighter than it is on the western grebe. And it's always a fun game to try to, you found a group of western grebes, now go through and try to see if there's a Clark's or two or three in among them. Okay, let's listen to the creek creek of the western. And creek of the Clarks. And of course, the Bobolink that does the R2D2 robot sounding noises that just are guaranteed to put a smile on your face. Pretty wonderful little bird. I guess I didn't put the the guttural haunts of the white-faced ibis in there, but it's a sound that's mostly going to make you turn your head and then see the large chocolate brown bird with a with a long drooping bill. Okay, our two toad sounds again. The plains spadefoot with the whir whir. So shorter, kind of whirring, versus the Great Plains toad, which just goes on and on and on and sounds like you're going. Okie dokie. And one more thing to add to the mix. You might go, gosh, Leanne, sometimes when I hear these frogs going, how do you count them? There's a lot of them. And I'm going to go, yes, yes, there is. And when you're surveying for amphibians, we actually use call codes as opposed to counts of individuals because it can be next to impossible to count the individuals. You know, unlike birds, when you have a lot of frogs, you have a lot of frogs. And it can all just start to blend into a wall of noise. So we have these call codes to help kind of describe the amount of chorus. And that's kind of a standardized way that allows researchers to know, okay, was there a few? Were there several? Or was there piles of frogs there? So there's 3 call codes. Call code number 1 is when you feel like you could actually count the individuals. There's space, you know, of no calling in between the start and end of calls. And, you know, calls of individuals of the same species, they don't start at the same time. And frogs do this to, you know, to avoid competition. So they want to kind of each of them wants to carve out their little, you know, soundscape if they can. So if there's only a few of them, they're going to actively try not to overlap their calls if they can get away with it. Obviously they can't always do that, but they will try to endeavor to do that. So they don't generally start at the same time. So like you can see here, there is some overlap, but they're not starting at the same time. This one starts over here, and then this one starts over here. But for the most part, you know, you do feel like you could count the species. So let's listen to what a call chorus of 1 would be. So, you know, it's pretty orderly sounding. It sounds like there's probably, you know, 3 there, maybe 4, kind of the 2 close ones. And then there's definitely that farther one that's less pronounced in the background. So, you know, not a loud, not a, you know, extensive chorus. Call code number 2 is there's some simultaneous calling. So you assign this code when there's a few males of the same species calling simultaneously. There are breaks in the chorus though, and you feel like you could still reasonably estimate the number of species. You go, yeah, it's probably like, you know, 8 or a dozen of them calling here. You're not totally overwhelmed yet. Let's hear what a call code 2 sounds like. So there is some overlap, and in some cases there's a fair bit, and then you wind up with the odd little pause here and there. That's a call code 2. Call code 3, on the other hand, is full chorus, calls are constant, they're continuous and overlapping, and individuals cannot be distinguished. You can't, it's hard even to say, like, pick out one individual's call for the most part. It really sounds like just a wall of sound. And I heard this the other day on the Nocturnal Owl survey. There was, call code 3 for wood frogs. It was just piles and piles of wood frogs. Like, you would have just throw out a number. It would have been an absolutely wild guess as to how many wood frogs there were, but I could confidently tell you that it was call code 3. So let's give a listen to what that sounds like. It's a little quieter. So apologies if you weren't able to hear that one. That recording was a little bit quieter. But as you can see from the spectrogram, it just kind of looks like a mess of sound on that frequency for the chorus, for the boreal chorus frog. So really, really hard to estimate. You just feel like you're surrounded by amphibians. And I wanted to mention that we do have a data sheet on the website that you can download. It has some of, and this is mostly going to be useful if you're in the the prairie provinces. It's going to have the checklist of the species that we covered in the program. But on the back, I've added a bunch of quick reference material. It doesn't cover everything, by any means, but it tries to cover, some of the trickier ones and key field marks for some of the more common drakes that you're likely to see on the water. And it does have the amphibian call codes. So if you want to, you don't even have to like print it out or anything. You just, take a look at it, and it's just kind of a bit more condensed information. Like I said, doesn't by any means, cover all of the species that we've covered, but it's a tidy enough little resource for some of the cryptic marsh birds, the ones that you're much more likely to hear rather than see, and again, some of those common field marks, as well as a little bit of silhouette information. If you're having trouble remembering horned grebe or eared grebe, which one has the pointy cone-shaped head, the sheet can be a little bit of a help to you. So hopefully you find that useful. And as our soundscape, I'm actually going to play the one that we did in the first soundscape that we had, because by this point we've covered a lot of the species, and this one does have LeConte and Nelson sparrows in it. There's a few kind of more marsh adjacent species that we can hear on the recording, but hopefully by now, when you hear this go around, the sounds are going to just be, if you can't identify them outright, you're going to go, yeah, I've been hearing this before. This is starting to sound familiar. And as one of the local members of the Saskatoon Nature Society, gave a great example in terms of learning, bird ID, bird sounds. You want to take stuff from the unknown bucket and put it into the familiar bucket. Maybe you can't put a name to it, but you go, oh, I feel like I've heard that before. And eventually you want to take stuff that's in that familiar bucket and put it into, the I know this bucket, where you can associate a name with it. But things can move back and forth between those buckets, and that always happens in the springtime. You're coming out of the winter, you haven't heard these birds in sometimes a long time for this far north. So hopefully most of these are familiar to you, at least the marsh birdie ones, and hopefully some of them you can outright identify. But this one is the annotated soundscape, so it does have those little birds that pop up, as well as the little music note symbol for the bird singing. So hopefully some of those bird sounds are, familiar to you. Some of them you might be able to name on your own. And this is one of the soundscapes that I do have posted online. So if for whatever reason your setup you weren't able to hear these very well, you can go back onto the YouTube soundscape playlist and listen to them at your leisure, and stick on a good pair of headphones if you want to really be able to hear them. I recommend over the ear headphones that maybe don't have noise canceling, because sometimes that kind of it blocks out some of the sounds you might be wanting to hear. So give a listen with some good headphones if you happen to have a pair. You'll be hearing all kinds of things on the recording. And that's it for the webinar this evening. My name is Leanne, and you can reach out to me at llatramoy@birdscanada.org, or just find me on the Birds Canada website and don't try to memorize how to spell my last name. It took me a while when I was 5 years old, I promise you. You can find out more information about the program on the Birds Canada website, and you can find Birds Canada on all of the socials. We are a national not-for-profit, so I would hope that you might be able to keep us in your giving portfolio if you are able to give to charity. And I would like to thank the supporters of MarshWatch who make this possible. That's the Manitoba Fish and Wildlife Enhancement Fund, the Government of Canada, the Saskatchewan Ministry of Environment's Fish and Wildlife Development Fund, and Wildlife Habitat Canada. And thanks to you for tuning in. Bye-bye.